Well, a new report suggests that 1 in 9 children now have a disability, largely a mental health disability, after a post-pandemic surge driven by mental health conditions such as ADHD. That's 1.6 million children reported to have these sorts of problems as a result of behavioural issues and disorders. A lot of it arising out of, well, the madness of locking children in their homes for months on end. Well, joining me now to discuss all of this is co-founder of Us For Them, Molly Kingsley. Good morning to you, Molly.
Good morning, Julia.
Let's just talk very briefly about the WhatsApp issue, because I know it's the children that you want to discuss mostly. But there's been an attack, understandably, by the leader of the Scottish Conservatives, Douglas Ross, on Scottish Government ministers and officials accused of an orchestrated and concerted effort to delete their WhatsApp messages during the COVID-19 pandemic. Some people didn't delete them, didn't realise. Government policy brought in after the pandemic suggested that people like Nicola Sturgeon should delete all her WhatsApp messages. How convenient that we don't know what was the real decision-making process that was going on behind the scenes. And what does that tell us?
I mean, it's just absolutely scandalous. And actually, our Us For Them's primary concern is children, but actually that's very broad, isn't it? Because children are really deeply impacted by terrible decision-making and poor governance. And, what better example do we have of that than the 3 or 4 years of the pandemic? And for any senior decision maker to claim that they could make and conduct government business by WhatsApp, they were allowed to do that, but that they at the same time could delete ritually all of their messages justifies belief. I mean, that is a conspiracy to deceive the public. I mean, that, Fraser Nelson wrote a very strong column about this in The Spectator, and I entirely agree. And I think we would say on that, we'll see what she says tomorrow, won't she?
Yeah,
I think
course,
is the next thing. But I would be very surprised if she escapes criminal proceedings for that.
Well, apparently it was government policy. They brought in a government policy that was very convenient for them. But again, you wouldn't be allowed to destroy, cabinet and briefing papers and the like. And if they choose to have government because everyone's on Zoom in that manner, then you would know that it was the right thing to not delete them, to keep those messages. I mean, it is extraordinary. There's also been an accusation from Michael Gove, who appeared at the COVID inquiry in Scotland yesterday, saying the SNP response to the COVID pandemic was partly driven by its aim to destroy the UK and for political advantage. But we also know, don't we, about, masks in schools in England. They were brought in, and people like Michael Gove were at the centre of those policy-making decisions and brought in because Nicola Sturgeon had done it in her schools, and they didn't want to have a row with her. They didn't want to look bad compared to Scotland. So, I mean, a plague on all their houses, really.
Exactly that, Julia, a plague on all the houses. And I think listening to the inquiry and reading the transcripts, very, very frustrating, because again, particularly yesterday with Gove's testimony, there was this focus on, was Sturgeon politicking? Was it all a game? And, I'm sure there is an element of that. And certainly it is valid for the inquiry to ask those sorts of questions. But it was really the exclusive focus of the hearings yesterday. And at the same time, there were some very serious questions that could have been asked of Gove, both yesterday and in the English sittings before Christmas, that haven't been. I mean, Gove was very instrumental himself in setting up this very unorthodox quad of ministers responsible for taking decisions outside of formal cabinet structures.
Yeah.
Why weren't we hearing much, much more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, again, because so much of it is tittle-tattle. And, oh, did you say a naughty word about the Prime Minister? I mean, genuinely, it's schoolyard stuff. It really is. Schoolyards, of course, were where children weren't allowed to be for many months during 2020 and 2021. I remember talking to you on my show really early in 2020 when you set up Us For Them, your parents' group, trying to get kids back in schools. From day one, I never said that children should be out of schools. I always said they should be in schools. We knew they were. Again, everyone says, we didn't know they were low risk. No, we did. It was absolutely known. Chris Whitty, Patrick Vallance said it quite clearly in press conferences in early March 2020. But this, you predicted this, and it's happened. The effect of lockdown and school closures on the mental health of young people has meant, a catastrophic effect on children who were already troubled, and also for children who were otherwise just fine, but were devastated by the impact of lockdown. And you and I know many, many parents and children who are going through this right now still.
We do, and the figures on this are really, really stark. So, there's been, well, it's incredible. 11% of kids last year reported a life-limiting condition lasting more than a year. Now, that includes things like autism, ADHD, but really importantly, that figure's up a third since COVID. So, in total, that's 1.6 million kids classed as disabled in this country. And you just think, how has that happened? That is such a devastatingly huge number. And as you say,
Our
Julia, this
people,
is,
people are much quicker to put a label on things now, which I think is actually quite unhealthy, rather than sort of
I couldn't agree.
the normal ups and downs of teenage life in particular. Yeah, sometimes you're going to feel miserable for a bit. That's part of life. This is a normal human emotion. But this is off the scale. This is something different, isn't it?
It looks that way, and there's quite a lot of uncertainty, I think, behind those figures. If you read the reports, it doesn't. The drivers of it are not entirely known. I think it is suspected that lockdown played a significant part in that. Something that hasn't been mentioned, but I think our research and other of our campaigning work suggests it would be an issue, is screens. Because of course, what happened during lockdown is all these children were forced onto phones and tablets, and we know that there is a correlation between increased screen time, particularly when it gets into the 3, 4, 5 hours a day category, particularly on social media, and teen mental health. And that is known. So, I think more support there for policies that we're beginning to see talked about in Westminster, particularly from Miriam Cates, has been, very vocal this week, last week, in calling for a ban on social media for kids. And I think these figures do support that.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, who'd have thought locking children in their bedrooms, no contact with the outside world other than on screens, would be bad for them? I mean, it's just a shock to all of us, isn't it? Molly Kingsley, you've been a fantastic campaigner on this. Thank you so much for joining us.